Complicated case. Part 2, environmental toxins and nutrient deficiency. So topics, our relationship with the environment. We talked about a lot about the importance of relationship, right? As far as care goes, caring for people, and then relating to each other. And then the impact of environmental stressors on our bodies, our minds, our spirits. That's what we're talking about. And so we're getting into this assessment of the external environment. We have to consider how the factors affect gene expression. And we were talking yesterday about epigenetics, right? The pressures that affect how the genes function, the molecular interactions that are associated with the genesis, development, and progression of cancer. It's one of those, one of the top chronic diseases, and the direct influence that the environment has on the host. So back to just like we were talking about yesterday, supporting the host is critical to reducing the negative effects occurred from surrounding stressors. So the 4 life requirements: adaptation, we've talked a lot about that; protection, how would we protect ourselves from these deleterious effects; energy, right, how do we make energy; and reproduction, how do we reproduce ourselves? And that's cellular and then also at the organism level. So when we're talking about toxins, we've got emotions at the top of it, right? Toxic emotions. That's a very big part of this toxic environment that we're in. If you look at the media today, you can't help but just get down a lot of toxic rabbit holes really quickly. Toxins from the environment overwhelm our detoxification networks. And we're going to talk about that a lot today. I want to get into the detoxification networks, and it won't be long before we're diving into how we can work with those networks to help them work better and help people detoxify these toxins effectively, how we can conjugate them, neutralize them, excrete them, etc. So one of the big things that happens is that we end up with free radicals, right? These highly charged particles that cause damage to tissues. And you can see that this is just a list of some of the things that happen. The dysfunction in the metabolic system. We talked a lot yesterday about dampness and phlegm as pathological factors, the heat toxins that can be developed. Those are Chinese medicine terms. Faulty enzyme pathways. The enzymes are there to denature the toxins. Reduced quenching capacity, or we can't quench the free radicals. Sluggish hepatobiliary pathways, and we talked about how in the springtime we have these things like dandelion, we have burdock coming up out of the ground. They're very good at being cholagogues and inducing that hepatic movement of materials, moving materials through the hepatobiliary pathways. That's the primary way we're going to get these toxins out of our bodies. We're going to conjugate them and put them into bile, put them into the liver, into these pathways, and then shunt them down into the biliary tract, get them out into the small intestine, and remove them from our bodies. Qi and blood stagnation, poor lymph flow, and then the bowels. We've got to have the bowels moving, right? Those of us who work with cancer a lot, the 2 top things that you always have to make sure you have working really well: sleep and bowel movements, digestion. Just get those 2 things working, and then you're already doing a great service for your patient. And if you haven't got those working, well, then we have a lot of work to do. So here's some of the wonderful things that are in the world that we live in today. We'll start digging into those. Anxiety, pollution, and lack of exercise. Big hit on the natural killer cell population when we can't do all the things that we want to do, like sleep well and like detoxify and move our bodies. It's just a little look at the biocides being sprayed during COVID-19. I grew up in Minnesota, and we'd be at the state park running around, and there's the big truck starts going by with the tank on the back, and just the whole park gets full of insecticide, right, for mosquitoes, DDT. Kids running around. Thankfully, my parents were aware. They were like, "Get the heck out of there! Get the heck out of there!" But yeah, scary stuff. So, looking at the DNA methylation. This is, again, methylation is part of the epigenetics. You have somatic mutations that happen at the genetic level. Things like that P53 gene we've talked about, the guardian of the genome. It's a tumor suppressor gene that gets mutated with a lot of these things that we were looking at, even just like the diet, the alcohol, the pollution, too much anxiety, things that will drive shifts in what are the brakes that turn off aberrant growth. P53 is one of the big ones. We also get what is called post-translational modifications at the protein level, where the RNA that's coming out, the RNA that's telling the nucleus to make new proteins, is making proteins that have faulty structures. They're not the normal structures, so they don't do what they're supposed to do. For example, enzymes that would degrade or break down chemical toxins, those things don't work anymore. And at both levels, you've got either stability or activity of the key regulatory proteins. And this is where you get into some of this stuff like oncoproteins, which are growth factors that have been turned on. They've been basically put into the accelerator is down, open the gas all the time. Like, for example, like HER2 new breast cancer, that growth factor, human epidermal growth factor receptor 2, is just basically just turned up. The cells are making a ton of that. And so the cells are covered in those receptors for that growth factor. And so that basically just, that's the on switch. And then like the P53 is the brakes. It's the off switch. It's like, hey, slow down. Don't make this new cell, this new protein. This stuff all gets really affected deeply by these toxins. So environmental exposures, occupational exposures, the metals, arsenic, lead, cadmium, nickel, silica, chlorination byproducts like dioxins, all the natural fibers. Asbestos comes from rocks and soil, but it's not good for us to have in these little fibers around in our space. The big one with that is the mesothelioma, right? We see a lot of that with asbestos exposure. Reactive chemicals like vinyl chloride, pesticides like glyphosate, which of course, how many people just have, somebody's just like, yeah, we used to use a lot of Roundup, and just like, that's just a common household thing to use Roundup. Solvents like benzenes, very highly aromatic. They break down really quickly. They're very volatile. And something like radon, being emitted from all the materials around us. And I just want to give a nod to Walter Crinian, one of our good buddies who used to take care of this side of things really well. Miss him. I'm sure a lot of you do too. Just a brilliant man who devoted his life to helping us understand the toxins and how to deal with them and how to make the world a better place. More things that we're looking at here, just to kind of list them off, right? The petrochemicals, just being in your car, being on the road, all the exhaust coming out of our vehicles. Polychlorinated biphenyls, ionizing radiation, tobacco smoke, wood and dust smoke, things like aflatoxins, molds that show up on things that then have carcinogenic properties, molds and mold toxins, which we talked about yesterday in our chronic infections. But it's a part of this too, because, a lot of times it's damage to buildings, homes, rooms, places that people inhabit where these molds have showed up and they're emitting the mold toxins into the environment, and you're breathing them in and becoming more and more sensitized to them and having a reaction to them that's starting to manifest as symptoms. We went through that yesterday, but we'll get more into it today. 70,000 synthetic chemicals, at least. I know I saw another paper in here that you'll see another number is like 80,000 chemicals in our environment. And I remember one of the things that Walter used to say was that, it's one thing to study a chemical toxin and understand how it affects the human body and just, be able to say what the kind of, what's the recommended maximum amount of exposure we could have as a human being based on animal studies of that one compound. Well, we're swimming in a soup of 80,000 of those. Has anybody studied that? How about studying 5 of them or 8 of them? So, we're exposed to thousands of them. So we're way off on our understanding of how much is okay to have of any of these things. So 50% of unexplained breast cancer cases thought to be due to these toxins. Here's just a really cool list of kind of the toxic environment. Just another way to look at it. Just you can see all the different places, right? That you get exposures. I'm not going to go through it, but you can see it. And, things like glue, magic markers, paints and paint thinners, right? Even frozen foods, things that they put in these, in everything gets something put in it. So water pollution, right? Surface and groundwater. You can see here, right? You got oil tankers, the oil petrochemicals, you've got construction, road work, all the stuff that's pouring into the water, tanks that are leaking, stuff that's going there. The city pollution runoff, all the dirt, the oil, parking, roads, that's all running into the water. Agricultural pollution that's going into the water, fertilizers and pesticides. The industry, right, that's just pumping out tons of chemicals, manufacturing facilities, We've got all this, all just like the human activities everywhere else, like landfills, improperly built landfills, of course, that just throw the junk in somewhere and hope it's okay. And so it's all going into the water, then it's all getting stirred around, and it's just, like right now, microplastics are everywhere. We're just, all the data shows that there's microplastics in the rain in Colorado. we know we have these big gyres in the ocean, right? These giant islands of plastic. It's not the only place they are. That plastic's getting into the hydrologic cycle. It's getting into the clouds, and it's getting dumped all over us everywhere. So, it's not just how can I keep myself away from this, from the toxins? It's how can I acknowledge the fact that I'm swimming in the soup of them every day, and I have to treat myself like that. So I need to be able to address them every day. So taking measures to protect ourselves. And that's what we're going to have the best possible outcomes and see the most powerful effects from the work that we're doing is in preventive care. It's much harder to treat something once it's developed into a disease. It's much better to treat things before they're diseases. Head them off at the pass. Endocrine disruptors, big term, right? Estrogen is a big part of this, right? This is like disrupting our endocrine system and especially disrupting the way that we metabolize estrogen. Estrogen has many different forms. It goes through many different metabolic pathways, and those can get disrupted by chemicals in our environment. Those chemicals that disrupt these are called endocrine disruptors, and it leads to all kinds of reproductive system issues, including cancers, including, infertility, feminizations. These are substances not naturally found in the body that interfere with production, release, transport, metabolism, binding, action, or elimination of the body's natural hormones. Things like phthalates, bisphenol A, the plastics, DDT, like I mentioned before. And here's BPA, bisphenol A. And I'll just say right now that BPA is just one bisphenol. There are many bisphenols. Don't be fooled into thinking that if something's BPA free, that it's okay. It may have BP, C, D, Z. I don't know how many there are now, but it could have any of them or many of them. So, just try to get away from the plastic. Glyphosate, this wonderful compound, antimicrobial from Monsanto Technology in 2010, right? Disrupts the gut bacteria in animals, preferentially killing beneficial forms and causing an overgrowth of pathogens. Disrupts the gut bacteria in poultry. Salmonella and Clostridium are highly resistant to glyphosate, whereas Enterococcus bifidobacterium and another one there are especially susceptible. Lots of disruption from glyphosate. And of course, we've been seeing a lot of these cases, right, coming out, glyphosate being associated with cancers and people actually, getting settlements, which is encouraging. Dioxin in the North American diet. Well, again, it's just another one of these compounds that just shows up everywhere now. Look, it's in everything, even in the water in negligible amounts, but the soil, we breathe it in. It's in eggs and fish, pork, all the meat, all the dairy. And then bromides are another thing, right? Bromides are in the same periodic table, the same column of the periodic table as chlorine, iodine, and fluorine, right? These are all in the same columns, and they're the halogens. And so when you get a lot of bromide in bromine in your diet through baked goods, which is what they use to replace iodine in these baked goods, you disrupt your thyroid function because the thyroid wants iodine, and bromine is similar, but it doesn't work like iodine. It's not the same. It's a different atomic structure. So we start disrupting thyroid function here. Mountain Dew, Gatorades, that have bromine in them. Pesticides contain them. You get it from hot tubs. People use bromine to to sterilize their hot tubs. All over the place in our environment too. So this is what people sometimes, I don't know, there's kind of like this whole Brownstein iodine school of thought. And those guys would basically give people huge amounts of iodine to kind of push the bromine out of the system, push it out of the thyroid. They would even do things like 50 milligrams of iodine a day. It's potassium iodide. That's what the kind of where he would go. If you know anything about iodine, that's a huge dose. Can be very thyroid suppressive. Iodine actually suppresses thyroid function at high doses. That's how they used to do surgeries. That they would, if there was thyroid problems, they would just give 100 milligrams of iodine and just suppress the thyroid. But for me, it's mostly seaweed. If I can give people seaweed, that's my first place to go. Seaweed is a great place to work because you can get hundreds of micrograms of iodine daily in that colloidal form in a matrix that the body recognizes, and then get that in. If you need small amounts, like there's like something like Iosol, it has all 3 forms of iodine, small amounts like, 1 milligram, you can dose it 1-2 milligrams in people. I always dose slowly. But people oftentimes with hypothyroidism, if they have Hashimoto's, it can be tricky to get the full recovery if you don't at some point use a small amount of iodine, like as seaweed, or like I said, really low. But you got to cover all the other bases too. You got to have the magnesium, got to have the sea salt, you got to have additional water, you got to have selenium. You can make sure that our whole complex is together. Then you can add just a tiny little bit of iodine and just bring it back in and push that through, because iodine is how the body makes thyroid hormone with tyrosine. Toxic effects, of course, lethargy, dullness, right? Your thyroid's not working anymore. Depression, headaches, irritabilities. So here's radon. This is a radioactive gas that comes from, again, the decay of uranium all around us in our rocks and soil. It can cause damage to our tissues like our lungs. Second leading cause of cancer in the United States, associated with 15 to 20,000 lung cancer deaths per year. It's interesting. Have you guys noticed the uranium glass craze right now? You see it, like if you go to like an antique store in a big city, there'll be people running around. They'll have like black light in their pocket and they're looking around. You haven't seen that? Oh, they're looking for lighting glass that lights up. It it starts to like glow. It starts to glow like this kind of green color. And that's interesting. And so it's like, they're like, oh, it's uranium glass, and they're gathering it and collecting it. Like I've seen some people in their house, they'll have like 3 cases of this glass with uranium in it. And I'm like, oh, how much radon you guys getting? You put it in the bedroom? Okay, cool. That's all right. Okay. Did you ever check it with a guy? You're kind of, oh yeah, it lights up. It's cool. I'm like, okay, cool. Where do I have this? You guys need some herbs? It's a thing. I don't know. It's like maybe they're going to get rich. We'll see. Epigenetics. All right. Link between the environment and gene expression. Definitely a big part of what can lead to disease phenotypes. And it's this epigenetic programming that can happen during fetal and postnatal development as a child, so that can precipitate metabolic syndrome, especially, women who take in a lot of sugar, a lot of fructose during pregnancy, and then kids who get too much fructose when they're very young. It sets up epigenetic changes that really makes it hard for them to overcome. The body composition starts to happen. It starts to become a machinery that gets set up that's based on that sugar. It's very well documented throughout the literature, and it's something that we should make sure people are informed of, that at a very young age we start to establish deep patterns in our genetics and our epigenetics that can be very hard to undo later in life. So obviously the epigenetics are woven inextricably with our environment. That's how it works. This is how basically we're getting into this idea that increasing oxidative stress will change the way our genes behave. And then once our genes have been changed, we have a harder time dealing with oxidative stress. So it's like a snowball effect. I mentioned P53, and this is a gene that I want all of you to be aware of. If you don't know about it, it's very important. It's found in at least 50% of all cancers have a mutated P53 gene. Like I said, it's a tumor suppressor gene. If you understand 2 things about tumor genomics, P53 represents the top of the tumor suppressor side of it. And then, like I said, there's the proto-oncogenes that become oncogenes. And those are the growth factors that turn on the accelerator. Those are the growth factors that get highly expressed on the cancer. And sometimes the cancer will even make the growth factor that then stimulates those growth factor receptors to induce growth. So make sure you understand those 2 things, tumor suppressor versus oncogene. This is a tumor suppressor gene. When the suppressor gene is turned off, it doesn't do what it's supposed to do, which is normally when there's a gene replication process happening, this gene along the genetic sequence makes a protein that then codes for errors. It looks for errors in the genetic sequence at all these intervals. And if there's an error somewhere, P53 protein has a function to shut off the replication, to stop the growth. It protects us from having cancer. And this is why CRISPR technology went got put on pause because CRISPR technology, which was basically a double strand break inside the genetic sequence to pull out a gene that was considered to be the gene that was causing a disease, like maybe like a collagen 4 mutation in someone who had, a collagen problem with the lungs, like a kid who couldn't develop properly. They would want to cut that gene out and then put a new gene in there. Problem is that when you double strand break the DNA, P53's job is to tell you, no, that cannot replicate. That is a bad gene sequence because it has a double break in it. Well, so if you put a new gene through CRISPR into a genetic sequence and it survives, it means it has a faulty P53 gene system, which means that that person is highly likely to have cancer in their life. So they don't do CRISPR that way anymore. They're trying to figure out a way to like make one break and squeeze it apart and put the new gene in there. We talked about mesothelioma and asbestos, aflatoxin B, cigarette smoking. And remember, cigarette smoking isn't just about tobacco. The native people here used to use tobacco in a respectful way. This is, cigarettes themselves have many, many chemical compounds in them, chemical toxins. Did anybody see this film? Anybody in here see Dark Waters? You did? Yeah, it's really good. It's Mark Ruffalo. Love that guy. And this is like Robert Bilott was an attorney, and he basically got called in by these farmers and shepherds, or they basically had like big cattle farms, and all their cows died. Just bleed out. They're just all dead all over the place. They're like, what the heck happened? And eventually turns out that this company was dumping this chemical, polyfluoroalkyl substances, PFOSs, and chlorofluoryl octane sulfonic acid, which was this name in this document, this big long name, which turned out to be Teflon. And they were basically releasing it into the water, and all the animals were dying, and they were, basically pumping this out into the world as this non-stick material. And he was like, whoa, this stuff is terrible. And it's a really great film too. It's kind of just one of many, many stories like this where someone has had to kind of stand up for something. So how do the toxins cause disease? Well, they poison the enzyme systems. That's very important, right? The enzymes are how we metabolize toxins. They displace minerals in our body, especially in the bones. They damage the organs, damage our DNA, modify gene expression, damage cell membranes, interfere with hormones, and impair detoxification on the whole. So what are some of the key nutrients we can bring in to enhance cellular metabolism? Well, Johnny was talking about yesterday, CoQ10. What a wonderful substance, right? Ubiquinone and ubiquinol. It's good to have both. They should be in an oil base, a nice dose every day that's very safe, 100 to 200 milligrams. Carnitine, which we've talked a lot about as a fatty acid shuttle, right? Helping fatty acid metabolism. Again, increasing cellular metabolism, right? Supplying all the nutrients that are needed to run the systems. The energy systems need energy. They have to run on energy. We have to build ATP. So a lot of this is how do we get the cell working strong? I've done these talks before on cellular respiration where, it's like you've got to run a furnace inside your cell. It's like a little star, like a powerhouse, right? And it's basically taking in fuel, burning it in oxygen, and producing energy. But it also has an off gas. It's got this heat that's being generated. That's the free radicals. So we quench it, right? You have superoxide dismutase, which quenches the first high oxygen charge. And then that goes out into glutathione, which quenches the peroxide radicals. And that breaks down into this neutralized, what we would call it an insulated heat that then is dissipated slowly and doesn't cause damage. Does that make sense? Right? You can think about it in terms of combustion. So everything here is to help with the combustion and then help with the insulation. Creatine, magnesium chelate, alpha lipoic acid, magnesium all day, glutamine. And the glutamine and cancer thing, just don't get too, sidetracked by all that. Glutamine, you can't remove glutamine from the body. You can't remove sugar from the body. You can reduce the amount of it that's circulating in the blood and not make it a big substrate or resource that something else could hijack. So sure, but you got to have glutamine. You got to have sugar. You got to have salt. We have to have things to run our systems. Omega-3 fatty acids, 3 to 5 grams a day is a great place to be. So hepatic detox network. Our entire blood supply passes through the liver many times per day. It filters the blood. bacteria, enzymes for digestion and metabolism, metabolization of harmful toxins. It makes and excretes bile, right? So the bilirubin that comes from the senescence of red blood cells in the spleen, it breaks down into biliveridin. The biliveridin goes over to the liver, becomes bilirubin. The bilirubin becomes bile. We put the toxins in bile to get rid of them. There's a 3-phase detox system, right? And then there's also cellular detoxification, right? The 3-phase system is phase 1 enzymes. Going to go through this. And then phase 2 conjugating enzymes. And then phase 3 is pulling it out of the intestines, getting it out of your bloodstream. And there's a cellular detoxification that's happening all the time as well, which I described some of that, right? Superoxide dismutase, glutathione, thyroidoxin, break everything down, conjugate it, make sure it's insulated, it's quenched. So key nutrients for supporting bile formation and flow. Taurine. Taurine is a great one, really good for the kidney, really supports kidney function. It's great for lowering blood pressure in people without causing toxicity. If people have a sulfur issue, if their CBS, cystathione beta synthase pathway is altered and running really fast, they can make too much taurine to start with. So you got to be that's the one case where you just watch out for that. But generally, taurine is very safe and very helpful, protective. Vitamin C, betaine, like we talked about yesterday, betaine can be in the form of food like beets. Lecithin. And betaine is also trimethylglycine, so it's another methylator. It's a methyl donor. Lecithin, which is phosphatidylcholine, right? Another thing that's very high, rich in eggs. It's in the egg yolks. So when you cook an egg, if you heat it to the point where it's like a scrambled egg and you've basically made it all hard, it's not soft and runny, then you've just damaged the lecithin. And you want the lecithin because it emulsifies the fats. Teaspoon doses of phosphatidylcholine, very good for helping, again, detoxification pathways, the bile. Methionine, again, methionine is, in nuts and meats and animal products, it's proteins. Inositol, also a little bit of that in eggs. Another lipotropic factor, helps the fatty metabolisms. And L-carnitine again. So here's our 3 phases. Phase 1, it's mostly oxidation, molecular breakdown. Those lipophilic molecules, right? So things that are not water soluble, which is the worst things, which the majority of those things that we were looking at, they're not water soluble. When we make non-water soluble things, where do they go? It's like we live in a world that's mostly water soluble. Our bodies work with things that are water soluble. There's, of course, lipids and oils, but things like plastics, anything that starts to become very hard to break down, where you need to have big charges, becomes harder and harder for us and backs up our systems. So lipophilic compounds are made water soluble in phase 1. Okay, these are the CYP enzymes. And then phase 2, we conjugate what are called the intermediaries, the intermediate metabolites. We conjugate them to neutralize the reactivity of the toxins coming through phase 1 to ready them for transport out of the body via the stools, the urine, and sweat. And then phase 3 is the toxin is in the bile, goes into the duodenum, and goes through the colon for excretion to the renal network before entering the bladder, excretion through the urine. But most of it is going to go through the digestive system, through the intestines. Oh, and of course, what's one of the big routes of detoxification? The skin, right? It's a huge detoxification organ. And we'll find that a lot of the environmental toxins are readily excreted through our skin. So heat, saunas, diaphoresis can be a really powerful way to get rid of a lot of these things, especially like the, stuff like styrenes, things that are like styrofoams, and industrial byproducts. We can get them out through the sweat better than anything. So here's just a look at this. In phase 1, you've got these reactions here, right? Oxidation, reduction, hydrolysis, hydration, dehalogenation, the halogens, right? That's our chlorides, fluorides, bromines. Here we have these enzymes and cofactors here. Key things, look at these are cofactors to run these enzymes. You got to have this stuff. Free radicals. And this is the important thing, intermediary metabolites. And sometimes these things right here are more damaging than the things we started with, because we have to cut them into different pieces. And sometimes the pieces we cut them in are more charged than what we started with. So what gets really problematic is when this process, phase 1, outpaces this process. That's when we get in big trouble. That's why we have to work so hard to support phase 2 detoxification. Phase 2 is where we take these reactive intermediaries and we make them not harmful. We neutralize them. We get all the antioxidants in here. Right? And then the things that we do, glucuronidation, like calcium B-glucarate, sulfation, all the sulfur things like, the glutathione, N-acetylcysteine, things like garlic and onions that have a lot of sulfur, glutathiones, acetylation with all the acetyl groups, amino acids, and then methylation, like we said, our methyl donors here. And you can see here's our going into that phase 3, right? Bile, intestines, excretion. Here we have into the blood, kidneys, filtration, and then urine. Does that make sense? Pretty clear? Cool. So phase 1 in the liver also happens in enterocytes, kidneys, lung, and brain. Hydrolysis, right? Hydrolysis, oxidation and reduction, either adding or subtracting an electron. So we metabolize toxins and medications. And this is a place that we're always looking to see, this is where it gets to this, herb-drug interactions issue, where we're always talking about how herbs and drugs interact. Most of it is happening right here. Actually, the vast majority of it. People are talking about what's called pharmacokinetics. What's the way that the body acts on the material, and looking and seeing, well, if that herb acts on the body in this way, well, if the body acts on the herb in this way, and the drug acts on the body, or if the body acts on the drug in this way too, then that's an interaction, and we should not put those things together. That's not a very thorough look at interactions. Interactions are very complex, and they involve, at the very least, these pharmacokinetics, but then also what's called pharmacodynamics, which is how the substance acts on the body. And then they include metabolomics, which is how your body changes the material as it comes in, especially with the microbiota population, all the different metabolism that happens in the enzymes that they manufacture in your digestive system. That we don't even look at that. We don't consider that. So what's actually getting into someone's body is different from one person to the next. So here's phase 2. Another look at it: glutathione, methylation, sulfation, acetylation or acylation, glycation, acetylation, and glucuronidation. These are just, and you can look more into them. I won't go too much into them here, but these are all really important pathways by which we conjugate, meaning we neutralize those oxidative intermediaries. All right, so key cofactors. For methylation, we want the folate, folic acid, SAMe, S-adenosylmethionine, methylcobalamin, that's B12. If people don't do well with methyl groups, if they're having trouble, you can use the hydroxycobalamin or adenosylcobalamin. Do not use the cyanocobalamin in general. Magnesium, trimethylglycine, that's your betaine from beets. P5P at B6, that's the reduced form. Choline, you could put a little inositol in here, vitamin E, vitamin C, and methionine. And then sulfation, molybdenum, which is a really good one for folks with sulfur metabolism issues. You can give a little molybdenum, like 100 micrograms, 200 microgram doses. And you can do it with food if people are having like sulfur meals that are irritating them. It's a nice way to how to bind up some of the sulfur. There's glycine and cysteine, which are also two of the molecules that make up glutathione. And then for acetylation, vitamin C, B1, and B5. And then, like I said, glucuronic acid, like calcium D-glucarate. So there's your magnesium again with glycine for glucuronidation. Now, phase 3 is how we remove these conjugated toxins, get them out of the body, right? There's our bile, urine, and sweat. So when we're thinking about different strategies, we can do a number of things, right? And we want to do all of the pieces together. And with everybody, you've got to kind of, work slowly and evaluate as you go. So, for example, binders and adsorbents, things that will actually pull materials onto them and stick to them, like clay and charcoal, they can be really helpful. You're basically, bringing these things into the body. They're going into the digestive system and they're adsorbing. They're pulling magnetically materials that are charged to them. Remember, with clay and charcoal, they can be a little slowing to the bowel. So you can, add something like a psyllium seed. So, you can add some aloe. You can add magnesium to help the bowels stay, fluid. Not fluid, but keep them moving. Stimulation of the hepatobiliary tracts, coffee enemas. I love coffee enemas. We've got very good instructions. They are very helpful. They dilate the bile duct, so you can actually move bile out of the biliary tree. Gallbladder flushes, I'm not a big fan of, but some people really love to do them. You do the whole malic acid and the olive oil, and you do lemon juice, and then you kind of you lay on your side, and then you get these big stones out. But I don't know that those actual materials are actually toxins or anything. It might just be some kind of like a formation that happens with that combination of materials. I'm not sure. So I don't generally recommend those gallbladder flushes. I also, if people like them, I also say, you can do them. But bowel elimination, colonic irrigation, I don't recommend it very often. Sometimes people really just want to do a clean out. I'm like, okay, that's fine, but don't do it regularly. We don't want to do squeaky clean. That's not how we are. We want to be dirty, The dirtier, the better in there. We talked about diversity, right? It's high fiber supplements. We talked yesterday about fiber and how important it is to help with cholesterol, right? Fiber will help to pull things out and keep things moving from our bodies. Surface elimination, right? This is where we get into hyperthermia. This can be the hot baths. Epsom salt is so great. Epsom is a wonderful way to get the salt and magnesium into the tissues, helps to pull toxins out of the skin. Saunas, inducing diaphoresis beforehand. So get the sweat going. Take some nice diaphoretic herbs 20 minutes before you get in the sauna, and then get a nice sweat going. And then skin brushing to pull the materials off the top of the skin. People are now doing the microneedling too with acupuncture, microneedling on the surface of the skin to remove those keratin-rich cells at the top, so you can kind of get layers that come up. That's another way to go. And then lymph massage, move the lymph system, do the lymph drainage techniques. And then you can do foot baths, hot foot baths, and hot Epsom salt foot baths are really good. People are into the ionic foot baths. I'm not sure that's really a thing. I like the salt, but I'm not sure about the whole, I do the ionic foot bath and they show you the water gets dark, and I'm not a big fan of it. So charcoal and clay, both useful for absorbing toxins, not absorbed into the bloodstream, right? They're working in the intestines. Problem is they can also absorb nutrients and synergistic microbes. They don't select what sticks to them. So you got to be careful. You don't want to take it with food. You don't want to take it with other supplements. You want to take the binders away from these things. Another one is like modified fruit pectin, right? Modified citrus pectin, which is useful for binding up things in the blood and other things. But any of these binders, you don't want to take them with nutrients. They activate the charcoal, right? They get this expanded surface area, so there's more carbon touching the air and the space, so you get more connection, you get more room to absorb things. 500 to 600 milligrams twice a day is a good dose. I like to take these at night. It's a good time when you're not taking other things, and it's a good time to get that in and start to pull some toxins out. There's clay again. You can adjust your dose. Watch the bowel frequency with it. And also, my favorite water filter is just a straight carbon filter, solid carbon filter. Don't do RSO for your water and then try to replace everything. Reverse osmosis. It's not, you don't want to strip everything out of the water. If you have water that needs to be detoxified, use a solid carbon filter. And then if you need to add other certain aspects, other filtration systems to get rid of some certain toxin, you can do that too. I like Multi-Pure. It's a really good solid carbon filter. Solid carbon, it's got that, carbon is this middle, right? It's got 4 electrons in its outer shell. So it's really good at grabbing onto both positively and negatively charged compounds, and it picks up all kinds of things. Just replace it every year. So enemas and colonic irrigation, water enemas are great just to kind of help keep the bowels moving. Retention enemas with herbs are like one of my favorite things. When I was in China, they'd have a person lie on their side, you lie on the left side, have pillows under the buttocks, and then they would take like a bottle with a long neck on it and have an herbal formula that was decocted in it. They would just insert that into the anus and then let the fluid drip into the colon, and then just try to hold it and let it get as far up as you can and hold it in there. And you get an herbal medicine dose in there that can be really helpful for both local stuff and then also for in the mesenteric venous system, which then, of course, drains up into the hepatic portal vein to go through the liver and get into that system really quickly. And coffee enemas do that really well. Also, like I said, dilatation, that's pulsing of that bile duct. And then, like I said, colonic irrigation, not my favorite thing. Probiotic enemas can be really helpful too. You can do probiotic enemas like, lactobacillus. It's really helpful in, as a way to replenish some of those colonic microbes. Thanks. Saunas, my favorite type is the Finnish sauna. Doing the actual heat, getting into a hot space rather than doing the near infrared or far infrared. I think the near infrared stuff can be helpful, or the far infrared. And if that's what people have, it's great. But do watch out for the EMFs and make sure it's a very low EMFs generating electrical stuff. You don't want, dirty electricity inside there. So it's got to be well made. Fasting is another thing we can do, right? As we can push the body into autophagy, which is that self-digestion process, right? And we have a long history of fasting. Fasting can be really, really helpful. It just has to be done well. And even dietary restriction, where you're doing caloric restriction, or you're doing intermittent fasting, where you're just fasting for part of the day, right? So people will just eat in a shorter period, can be really helpful. I don't think, again, it's the way to eat for long-term health and life. You don't want to we want to basically, I think that the same story is like, 3 meals a day kind of thing, like kind of eating when you're hungry, that type of that's like just how we live as animals. I think that's probably the best way to go. But I think for periods of time, it's good to do shifts like this, like where you fast, and doing like fast once a week where you do just skip lunch and dinner, just skip 2 meals. That's a 24-hour fast. That'll put you in a high rate of autophagy, self-digestion, where you're taking apart all the broken down and damaged organelles in your cells, getting rid of things that shouldn't be there, and actually taking a look at what's already there. It's kind of like we were talking about on Saturday morning, right? We're talking about how people have so much stuff, it's like, well, if you're shopping all the time, you're going to keep putting more boxes into your storage space. But if you stop shopping for a while, you might go and look around and see, gosh, I think I have some clothes. I think I have one of those. And you look around, oh, I do actually. Oh, that was, let's get rid of that one. And suddenly you're digging through all the stuff. That's what fasting does for us. So autophagy is where we make these autophagosomes, right? And the autophagosomes then digest the materials that we don't need, that are broken, and break them down. They're like these, they're lysosome enzymes that we put into these invaginations in the cell, where we stick all this junk and then we break it all down, and then we can recycle parts we can reuse, and then we can get rid of the junk and turn it into something else or burn it for energy. And in the brain, there's neuronal autophagy that we've discovered now. The brain is not isolated, so we can actually induce this in the brain. And so we're talking about dementia and, Alzheimer's disease. This is very helpful in that case too, inducing autophagy. There's other things that people are doing today. Like we talked about resveratrol is a really great way to induce autophagy. It's pterostilbene from pterocarpus. Some of the things that help turn on the sirtuin genes. The sirtuin genes will help to increase autophagy. They were generated in early replicating organism as a way to protect them from environmental changes and environmental challenges that were happening on the earth. Sirtuin genes developed to keep them safe by pulling them out of reproductive cycles, because once you're in a reproductive cycle, that's when you're vulnerable. So when replicating organisms were, in their beginning, according to the evolutionary story, they would just die off when a big environmental pressure came because they couldn't stop replicating and go into a protective place. It was the sirtuin genes that basically turned some of those replicators into this self-preservation mode that then allowed them to survive. And they survived. And then those sirtuin genes came on. And we'll see that those genes are conserved through life forms way, way, way down into, small multicellular organisms. Therapeutic principles, draining versus tonifying. We talked a lot about this, right? Don't drain somebody. Don't detoxify them heavily if they're really deficient. You've got to build them up. You got to tonify them. Those enzyme systems I'm talking about, that takes a lot of our yin energy. It takes yang energy to run them. It takes yin materials to build them. And if someone's deficient, they're having night sweats and hot flashes, they're feeling terrible, they're fatigued, and they can't digest things. Don't start draining them. Oh, I got to clear out all these toxins. No. First, let's get this person strong enough to be able to handle the techniques of clearing and draining. So I won't go too deep into this, but you see all the different types of deficiencies and the pathogenic factors. I love looking at both sides of this, having a traditional medicine perspective as well. We talked a lot about glutathione. Here's the molecule, right? Got to have this stuff. Oxidative stress in the cells. NRF2 and KEAP, these are the enzyme pathways that generate glutathione. It's gamma-glutamyl cysteine, So you've got glutamine, cysteine, and glycine. So you need to have those building blocks in place, and then you can use the herbs to generate the glutathione out of the building blocks. But you got to have both the building blocks and the guiding force. Phase 2 enhancing nutrients: selenium, calcium D-glucarate, ellagic acid, DIM, isothiocyanate, sulfur-rich foods, alpha-lipoic acid, NAC. Here's NAC, 1 to 2 grams a day. Whey protein is super rich in it. It's got a lot of benefit in many different aspects of life, quality of life and well-being, and great for detoxification. Glucosinolates, this is coming from the broccoli. I call them cabbage sprouts, broccoli seeds, broccoli sprouts. And the glucoraphanin and glucosinolate is great. This is all phase 2 detox. So getting people to eat a lot of these foods and then also using some of that broccoli extract, like broccoli seed extract is really good. You can do there's also like mustard seeds are very rich in this also. Tons of data though, very strongly supportive of phase 2 detox. Diindolylmethane methane as well. This is when we get to that estrogen metabolism. You want to make sure you're guiding estrogen metabolism all the time, especially in women, but also men too. We need to make sure we're taking things like diindolylmethane methane to keep us hydroxylating estrogens. That's what's called the 2 position. The really scary things are called 4-hydroxyestrones, and those are very highly associated with aberrant growth. Milk thistle, so good for us. Such a great one to support glutathione. Very protective. In the studies that they did, there was a couple of case studies actually on people that got poisoned from eating the wrong mushrooms, in the wild. And there was a couple of these centers. They all went to different centers, and the centers that had milk thistle on hand, the people survived. And the place they didn't, they didn't. Really interesting stuff. Very powerful protective effects. I mentioned dandelion. Enhances UGT. That's another enzyme system to break down toxins. So many wonderful benefits with dandelion, and you can dose it nice and high. And I like, if there's heat toxins, it's more the whole plant. If you want to regulate the liver just more directly with like sluggishness and stuff, it's more the root. But I like to use the whole plant most of the time. And right now I just walk around eating it all the time. It's so good. It's delicious. And it's really sweet in the spring. The mushrooms, again, biomediation, mycomediation. Mushrooms are absolutely one of my favorite things to help detoxify. And people always say, oh yeah, mushrooms, don't take the mushrooms. They're going to raise your liver enzymes. No, they're not. They're going to actually reduce your liver enzymes. Once in a while, someone is sensitive to something. That's for sure. That happens with all kinds of things. We've hit St. John's wort the last, 2 lectures. I won't go much into it, but it induces that 3A4 enzyme. So it starts to be a major route of detoxification. But it also, like for certain things that are 3A4 activated, like if you take let's say a pre-molecule, like you have an active metabolite from a drug, let's say, if 3A4 is the activation pathway, then you'll have more of that drug available. So the example of this would be something like let me turn this off, tamoxifen, which turns into endoxifen via the CYP2D6 pathway. But it can get some induction with this. The 2D6 pathway was actually inhibited by SSRIs, and that was what they were giving women for helping them with their vasomotor symptoms. But at the same time, they were reducing the effectiveness of the tamoxifen. It took some years to figure that out, but eventually they realized that and stopped doing that. Celery, love celery and celery seed. Celery juice is wonderful too. Great detoxifying strategy. Lymphagogues, herbs to remove blood stagnation. Phytolacca, the ceanothus, is a great one for the spleen as part of that lymphatic system as a primary lymph organ. Cleavers, myrrh, and Chinese salvia. Great stuff for moving materials. And here's just, again, a list of liver-specific foods. I want you to have this. I'm not going to go through it, but this is for you and your patients to have. Here's another, more on this list. MCT. So here's the keys. Remove the insults first. Eat supportive, whole foods. Go for the green and the bitter. Go for bitter. Bitter is cholagogues. That's the things that are going to move the liver energy. And remember that old adage, right? Eat bitter and you'll taste sweet. Eat sweet and you'll taste bitter. So use botanical medicines to support detox, use nutrients to support detox, employ the fasting strategies and remember, always watch out for people. People are real catabolic. If they're really, if their constitution is already thin and weak, don't have them fast. Make sure you evaluate them for that. Employ the enhanced elimination pathways. Make sure they're eliminating well. Sleep long and deep and well, and calm the stress response. Diet. How diet influences the genes. Diet is a big influence on P53. Remember, it's red meat that's been prepared, grown, and cooked inappropriately. That's the problem. Phenolic compounds, cosmetics, pharmaceuticals, lacquers. And I wanted to just mention again the importance of the circadian clock. And like I said yesterday, women who work at night and who experience sleep deprivation, circadian disruption, exposure to light at night are at increased risk of breast and colorectal cancer. Same thing for men with prostate cancer. The data is indisputable. If people that you're working with are working the swing shift or the night shift, you got to stay on one side or the other. You can't live both lives. It won't work. It's okay if you go to the dark side, like you work at night or whatever. That's fine, but just keep staying awake at night. Don't switch it real quick to hang out with your family. If that's how it's going to have to be, you got to get a different job. Or make your family stay up all night every night. So rotating shifts, 4 times more likely to develop prostate cancer than those working regular hours, right? And this gets back to this, when we get back to this idea of the kidney essence adrenal network and how important it is to have that rhythm established. It's rhythm that's going to work for us. We need it to be rhythmic. When the body knows what's coming, it doesn't have to prepare. It doesn't have to do a bunch of adaptation to try to get ready for something. It already knows what's coming. It's going to be the same thing. It's going to be, we're going to eat at the same time, sleep at the same time. You're going to kind of generally. So it's like vary a little bit, but you don't want to be varying by 3, 5, 7 hours a day. That's not going to work. Even if you do like 3 days on and then switch it. That's the idea. Just look at this. Just simply limiting TV to 7 hours a week can contribute to weight control. Super basic stuff. Sedentary. Short sleeping hours, body composition. Gotta sleep. And just for folks that are having trouble with apnea, the CPAP machines are really hard for a lot of folks. They just can't deal with them, especially if they're OCD or if they've got, different kinds of irritations, like this. You just can't have a thing on your face and the sound. Try these. There's new snoring devices that like push the jaw forward. You kind of mold them into your mouth. I've had some good luck with these with some people. Can be really helpful. But if people are having this really severe apnea, and this Chinese medicine, it's like that, again, that spleen chi deficiency where everything's sinking. And that's like this breaking down of that lifting energy. You can put this device in your mouth. It's real simple. But it just helps to kind of keep the jaw forward so you don't fall and close off the airway. Exercise. And this is just a cool list. If you want to have this, take a look at it. There's a lot here. You can see on the left is the vitality. What do you do? On the right side is the stressors. We went through all those, but so many good things we can do for people. And I wanted to just mention here, this is kind of one of Donnie's slides, the I, the we, the it, and how we're all in it together, interconnectedness. There's nowhere to go. We can't escape the world that we're in. So we've got to get better at living in it together. Okay, part 2, you guys ready? Yeah. Nutrients. Poor diet, depleted soils, improper agriculture, monocropping, and chemical applications. We've depleted our soils of nutrients. So now our foods are depleted. Environmental toxins, we just talked about them. What do they do? Well, they need all these minerals. They need all these vitamins. They need all these nutrients to work. Our systems, they require tons of selenium. They require tons of zinc. They require tons of B vitamins. We need more now. Our soils are depleted. We've got less coming in. So now we're at a double, deficiency. And then, of course, stress and medications are big causes. Proton pump inhibitors we talked about yesterday, right? How much nutrient deficiency we see coming from just that one alone. Here's the top nutrient deficiencies in the world today. Iron. Do you know that was one of the top ones? Zinc, magnesium, vitamin D, the B vitamins, and vitamin A. Why would we use whole foods? Well, because the body knows whole foods. The body doesn't know single molecules. We grew up with whole foods. We grew up with matrices, complex mixtures of molecules. One of our plants we use, the one herb, has got 500 molecules in it, right? It's not a single molecule. So whenever we can, we try to, either have nutrients that have been fed to a microbe, like the Saccharomyces cerevisiae. It'll absorb the nutrients, then you can eat the microbes to get the materials in. It can be in a food form that's been concentrated, but you want to try to get it in a form that the body can recognize it. Some things like magnesium, they don't get taken up very well, so we use chelates, right? We chelate them to certain molecules that make them bioavailable. Oh man. With all these things, there's a U-shaped curve, meaning that there's an optimal place you want to be with nutrition. As with anything in our bodies, cholesterol, vitamin D, sodium, selenium, calcium, more is not better. Less is not better. Optimal is better. So here's the U-shaped curve, right? So the lowest incidence of disease occurs in the middle range. It's a parabola. Peaks in the upper and lower ranges, right? So very, very indicative with something like cholesterol. Cholesterol levels, as you go below that 200 and get down below 180, you're down over here. Now you're into this zone. You're starting to go here. And with a lot of these things, like with sodium, for example, the lowest sodium is the highest risk of cardiovascular disease. Less than 1.5, you're in trouble a day, right? Over here, you're getting into the 5, 7, 10 grams a day. You start getting into problems. But just the same thing with cholesterol. Low cholesterol, very highly problematic. Once again, optimal. Everything in balance. This is that sodium concept. And you can see it's kind of you see how the line on the left here is actually steeper. And this is Eric Topol. He's the editor-in-chief of Medscape. This guy's a serious conservative. But this is his evaluation. Look, man, you go low and you're getting into some serious risk factors. Sodium is very misunderstood, along with calcium, along with cholesterol, along with many things, along with fatty acids. Here's selenium, again, optimal, right in here. Homeostatic house cleaning, keeping track of everything. Selenium does a great job, but we start getting over here. You don't want to have this much selenium. Let's get problems. Vitamin D, all-cause mortality. Here it is. You can see this is coronary heart disease, levels of vitamin D, stroke, all-cause mortality. Again, it's a U-shaped curve.
Where's the next left?
We're looking more at the bottom right here. We're looking at this spot right here. We want to look at the U-shaped curve. Outcomes.
So really
low is still problematic. Vitamin D is one of those things where, when it's really low, you can see, how many people here have seen cancer cases come in their clinic and just seen the vitamin D level at 16 or 20, And we don't really understand the range that well. And we don't test the 25 hydroxy and the 125 dihydroxy together, which we should do all the time. It's the conversion of the storage form of vitamin D into the active form. And we don't even look at that. Here's cholesterol. U-shaped curve again. Optimum. And look at this. Look at how steep that goes. We were talking yesterday about how catabolic it is to have low cholesterol. It's what we make all of the signaling molecules, the hormones, the steroids that tell our body to rebuild itself. If we don't have the building block to do that, how do we rebuild ourselves? We don't. We break down. Iron, essential mineral, right? Carries the oxygen around our tissues. What's the number one stressor for a living organism like a human being? It's not getting enough oxygen. 3 minutes. And what? You're gone. You're dead. You're at least unconscious, right? Every single moment of every single day, you're breathing, and every cell in your body is getting supplied with oxygen. If you don't have good supply of oxygen, suddenly your body is under a stressful pressure. Like, I might not get a breath. Like you see people, you get severely anemic. You start to get into things like when hemoglobin gets about below 10.5 and people start having shortness of breath and stuff. The stress that puts on the system is very real. It's very intense. We don't want to have people in those states. We want to have people nourished, sleep deeply, get a lot of oxygen, make sure that iron and hemoglobin levels, red blood cell levels are strong. Iron's got a big role in the memory, learning, in the brain. Major health problem worldwide. 1.5 billion people affected, not so much in America, but all over the world. Iron supplements made from the USP iron, difficult to absorb, get a lot of side effects, especially constipation, right? Ferrous sulfate, 325 milligrams, is 65 milligrams of elemental iron, and people traditionally are dosed 3 times a day for anemia.
See that.
But they've shown here, again, a 16-week study here, this one, that just dosing about a third of that, you'll get really good results. Just build it up slower. Don't do it so fast, especially because you get more side effects at the higher doses. So clinical signs of iron deficiency: fatigue, shortness of breath, weakness, paleness in the hands, eyelids, lips, face, nails. In Chinese medicine, when you see blood deficiency, it's a pale tongue, pale lips, you see paleness of the skin. And that can be iron, but it can be other things in the blood too. The blood in Chinese medicine is a much bigger concept than just iron. But we think about it in terms of iron as one of these major concepts, for our blood and for the oxygenation of the body. But that paleness, you see that's a major sign. Spooning nails, another one here. And then we look at the blood work, the low reticulocyte count, those immature red blood cells, high RDW, that's the red distribution width, that oftentimes the high RDW is this production of more cells, low serum iron, high total iron binding capacity, a lot of capacity to bind iron, because a lot of it isn't bound. Low ferritin, that's the storage form of iron, right? This is a big complex made in the liver that holds the iron. And then high soluble transferrin receptor. Soluble transferrin receptor is a receptor that's on the cells of the body that's soluble. You can pick up part of it in the bloodstream. And when it's high, it's like the cells are saying, I need a lot more transferrin. We need more iron. So you start to see it's like mouths that want iron. That's when the soluble transferrin receptor level. And that's a really good one to cut through the difference between iron deficiency anemia and bone marrow deficiency. So what are the causes? Obviously, you're always looking for blood loss if you see this in people, right? Like, are people having, something like diverticulosis, colon cancer, they're having, colitis, something that might be causing them to lose blood. That's one place that they could be, having an iron deficiency. Low iron absorption, right? Achlorhydria or hypochlorhydria, right? Gastritis, atrophic gastritis. The stomach isn't functioning well. Low hydrochloric acid, or not enough intrinsic factor, which we need to absorb B12 and for iron. Infection, inflammation, tissue injury, cancer obviously is a big one. Cancer will absorb a lot of iron. Cancer is 3 big things, right? Sugar, iron, and copper. Those 3 things cancer needs really, really a lot of. It needs the sugar to run the energy systems. That's the Wahlberg effect, and that, the cells that are running the glycolysis system. And it needs the iron for gene replication, and it needs the copper for angiogenesis. Oops. That high intake of phytates from plants and calcium can decrease iron absorption. So when you're doing iron replacement, make sure that you're not doing it with phytates. Like beans have a lot of phytates in them. You can of course remove them. Calcium also, you don't want to take it with iron. You can take it with some citrus to help it absorb a little better. Don't take it with tannins like tea. Medication, the proton pump inhibitors reduce iron absorption. And there's some, uncommon stuff there. There's things to keep an eye out for. And then decreased intake, of course. I use cast iron pans at home. I love them. I don't use metal on them. I use wooden spoons, unfortunately. But I always I feel like I get a little bit of iron from that. It's not the best, most absorbed form, but it's a little bit. So food sourced iron is the best. The heme iron. Heme comes from living things. Lactobacillus bulgaricus is a great way to bind iron to a living organism. Biogurt culture. There's some companies that have these biogurt cultures now, and it's a really good form. It's really well absorbed. More gentle on the stomach, doesn't cause so much of the, the constipation. Fermented foods can increase iron absorption. Don't take it with dairy. Like I said, take it with vitamin C and citrus. So, some things that I often give with iron, if you're giving iron, try to give herbs that guide and direct iron absorption and utilization, like beet, yellow dock, Dongquai or Angelica, Dongwei, Lamania. Then you can do either the raw form or the cured or the processed form prepared. It's more rich and more blood nourishing. White peony. These are good herbs that you want to take with iron to make sure that the iron is being absorbed and make sure it goes where you want it to go. So when you're looking at the iron status, some of the things that we can look at, like again, immature red blood cells, the swelling of the cell, the corpuscle volume, mean corpuscle volume, MCV, right? If there's a lot of swelling there, it often indicates there's B12 deficiency. Reduced MCV is more associated with low iron and anemia, microcytic. I mean, the cells are small. There's not enough iron, so the cells actually got smaller. Reduced MCHC, the mean corpuscle hematocrit, that's the hypochromic red blood cells that are a little bit pale themselves. They have a lack of iron. Serum iron itself, how much iron is actually circulating in the blood. Ferritin, that storage form of iron. Transferrin, which is elevated in iron deficiency. And then that, like I said, that soluble transferrin receptor would be elevated in iron deficiency. And it would be it would be low when there's plenty of iron. When there's plenty of iron in the cells don't need to express the soluble transferrin receptor because they have a lot of irons. And then total iron binding capacity, low in anemia of chronic disease. Anemia of chronic disease, like cancer, is a classic one. So moving on to zinc, one of the most important nutrients today, absolutely hands down, involved in over 300 known enzymatic pathways, cell communication, proliferation, differentiation, survival. It's found in every cell in the body. We don't store it well. It's absolutely essential for immune system function. It activates the T lymphocytes. It's great for wound healing. We need zinc. And you'll find that zinc is deficient in a lot of people. We don't store it well. It's difficult to get through the diet. The biggest natural source is oysters. Yeah. Our soils are depleted of zinc. Levels decrease with infection, trauma, stress. Or if I can move this thing without disrupting everything, let's see. Scary. Oh yeah, I just did it. Here we go. All right, forget it.
The top of your eyes.
What is it?
You might be able to fix it.
Oh yeah. Okay. I wanted you guys to see. Yeah. You guys know steroids good. You guys are there. All right. I'm just gonna leave it. I'm too scared. Signs of zinc deficiency. We saw the spoon nails, with the iron deficiency, and then here we have white spots on the nails. Little white spots. That's a good indication. Weight loss, delayed healing of wounds, loss of taste. This is a big one with COVID stuff. Get the zinc in people's bodies. The zinc, like I said, quercetin is a zinc ionophore. It helps absorption of zinc into the cells. Impaired growth and susceptibility to infections. The most important nutrient for immune function, both innate and adaptive, right? Humoral immunity depends on zinc. You need it for neutrophils, monocytes, macrophages, natural killer cells, B cells, and T cells. So that's image of how zinc just has so much influence on our immune function. The thymus, the T cells, right? T cells are trained in the thymus. This was a really cool look at some studies where kids they were trying to recover from respiratory infections in different centers, and they weren't recovering. They weren't having, their wounds weren't healing, their respiratory infections weren't going away, and then they gave them zinc, and they all started to heal. When you read this data, you're like, oh my God, wow, the zinc, that's amazing. It's so helpful for wound healing and for infection for overcoming infections. Dude, serum levels are good. They're accurate. The zinc taste challenge works really well. It's like 5 milligrams of liquid zinc in a tablespoon of water. Put it in your mouth, swirl it around for 30 seconds. And then the kind of taste you get will tell you. If it's really strong, like battery acid, you got plenty of zinc. If you taste nothing, you're zinc deficient. And I've correlated that with blood tests many times, and it's very accurate.
Say that again.
Guys, if you put this 5 milligrams of liquid zinc in a tablespoon of water, swirl it in the mouth for 30 seconds, spit it out, Unless they've had food, then you can swallow it. Remember, zinc will make you nauseous if you take it on an empty stomach. Okay. The zinc RBC levels might be more accurate, but it's more expensive and probably not necessary. Again, you can feed it to Saccharomyces cerevisiae, get it in a whole food matrix, have those chaperones, those cofactors that naturally occur inside the matrix, and let the body see it and use it more efficiently. Magnesium. This is like everywhere I go. I'm just like, yep, make sure you get magnesium. We should just all take magnesium. It's just absolutely abundant. 7th most abundant element in the Earth's crust. 2nd most common intracellular cation. Essential for so many different parts of the body as an electrolyte, especially. Highest concentration there in the bone, followed by the heart and the brain. Deficiency of magnesium. 75% of the U.S. population is getting suboptimal amounts in their diets, right? Daily dietary intake of magnesium has decreased from 500 to 200. Soil depletion. Foods are depleted, and we need more. It's also depleted by medications like PPIs. The diuretics deplete magnesium. Platinum-based chemotherapies like cisplatin, carboplatin, oxaliplatin, digoxin for heart strength. They use digoxin, from digitalis to impart strength to the heart. Things that are the systems and conditions associated with magnesium deficiency, the electrolyte problems, of course, like muscle twitches and spasms, people having muscle spasms and cramps. That's really important for that. Neurologic issues, musculoskeletal, inflammatory. It's essential in osteoporosis with boron, with manganese, with your vitamin K, vitamin D, etc. Inflammatory disorders, hypertension, cardiovascular disease, is really good in atrial fibrillation, calms the heart, regulates, heart conduction, neurological conduction. It acts as a calcium channel blocker, like a natural one. It's like the calcium channels open, but magnesium will compete and keep those calcium ion channels a little bit. It'll softly inhibit calcium ion channels. Inversely associated with cardiovascular disease, improves heart rate variability at 400 milligrams. We talked about that yesterday, right? HRV, how important it is for vagal nerve tone. Competes with calcium, leading to vasodilation and relaxation of the muscles. This is cool. Alzheimer's disease, right? Significantly lower CSF magnesium than healthy controls. Get magnesium in your patients. Look at the signs. Muscle twitching, poor memory, fatigue, insomnia. If you get into severe deficiency, you get things like delirium, numbness, hallucinations, all kinds of things. Tingling. So we don't see that very often, but that's just kind of a nice spectrum to see where it can go. Absorption, again, chelation with glycine. You can chelate it with, aspartate. You can chelate it with lactate. You can chelate it with, all kinds of things. There's, magnesium malate, magnesium citrate, magnesium oxide. All of them have different applications. And the ones that are the most bowel moving, the less absorbed will be magnesium citrate, magnesium oxide. Those are really good for getting the bowels going. Magnesium malate, magnesium taurate. Malate's really good for the muscles. Taurate's really good for the nervous system and the heart. Aspartate, good for the nerves. Lactate, better for digestion. It goes on and on. But I like the magnesium kind of glycinate is really good in general because it's not bowel stimulating. Malate will be bowel stimulating to some degree, not as much as citrate and oxide, but it'll be really good for the muscles and muscle cramping and fibromyalgia type stuff. Maybe the RBC levels are more accurate because the serum levels aren't very good because all the magnesium is really in the bone, the brain, and the heart. It's not very much. There's only a small percentage of it in the bloodstream. So people measure magnesium a lot in the hospital, but it's not very accurate. A lot of times you need to give people magnesium anyway. So vitamin D, steroid molecules, it's a hormone, right? Transcription factor goes right into those cells and directs function. Sunlight, we convert cholesterol into vitamin D in our skin, right? So huge impact on everything. It's just absolutely essential that we have regulated and replete vitamin D levels. It's a public health problem worldwide, having low vitamin D, reduced sun exposure. Do you guys feel like we have reduced sun exposure? Yeah, we wear clothes. We drive around in cars. We live in buildings and houses all the time, right? When they did some studies on people in Kenya living out in the wilderness there, just out in on the plains and stuff, Their vitamin D level was like 47, 48 nanograms per deciliter. That was just like them just living their natural, normal life, But those are people with very dark skin because they are exposed to a lot of sun. When you take those people with a very dark skin and you put them in an environment that doesn't have as much sun, they become vitamin D deficient because their bodies are protected by keeping the skin dark. They're actually reducing the amount of conversion of vitamin D from cholesterol in their bodies, so they don't get vitamin D toxicity. They get calcium toxic. They get hypercalcemia. They'd be sick. Those of us who grew up in the north parts of the world where we had very light colored skin because we needed to get a lot of vitamin D because we didn't have a lot of sun, especially in the wintertime, we take that vitamin D and we make it really quick and we store it. And so then you put us in a place where there's a lot of sun and then we get our vitamin D levels get high. We can get sun sick. Here's just a look at kind of where we are right now. This kind of overview, right? Severe deficiency, 0 to 10. Deficiency, 10 to 20. Insufficiency, 20 to 30. This is nanograms per milliliter. Optimal concentration somewhere in the 30 to 80. It's a big range. But again, remember, there's an optimal range. It's somewhere in there. It's probably around 50, 40 to 60. You can push it up for some people. 3 ways to get vitamin D: sunshine exposure, dietary intake, and supplementation. What's the optimal range? Like I said, it's probably around that above 40. And some people, 60 to 70, depending on what their condition is. There have been cases where people have, taken more vitamin D and had really profound results. So, we just don't know enough about it yet. Like I said, always check both forms, 25 hydroxy and 125 dihydroxy. Vitamin D, the 25 hydroxy levels more accurately reflect the vitamin D status, but you want to make sure the person isn't over converting, because if someone has a 25 hydroxy D of 50 and you're giving them a whole bunch of vitamin D to maintain that there, and then they're converting it to 125 dihydroxy, that dihydroxy could be like 150, that 125, and you don't know it. They could have high calcium levels in the blood, and they could have calcifications developing from that. This is just kind of looking at both of those, right? Vitamin D3 is converted in the liver to 25 hydroxy. And then in the kidneys, 125. That's the active form for circulation in the blood. And then I said hypercalcemia is a problem. Such a huge factor in the immune system. I always think of vitamin D as the sunlight going into our bodies and becoming the headlights on the immune system. So the immune system can identify what's self and non-self clearly. That's the job of the immune system. What's me? What's not me? What's supposed to be here and what's not. Autoimmunity with deficiency. Cardiovascular disease, huge role here. Suppression of parathyroid hormone. I know Donnie talked yesterday about the importance of parathyroid. Look at the parathyroid for atrial fibrillation. A lot of calcification in the aortic nerve fibers get calcified. The vascular calcification. Here's that look at vitamin D again, all-cause mortality and CVD mortality. U-shaped curve, guys. Look at that. Somewhere between 40 and 100, right?
That's the animal split genome.
What's that?
That's the animal split.
Exactly. The other one was milligrams per milliliter or nanograms per milliliter. That similar curve. Same story, U-shaped curve. Neurocognition, we talked about this yesterday in large extent. Cognitive decline with vitamin D deficiency. Should we be checking this in people? It's really easy to get a vitamin D test. Here's just a little bit of vitamin D in breast cancer. So when you're testing vitamin D, the fingers prick, the spot test is really accurate. And the serum test is also accurate. So you can do it either way. But there's no other way to do it that I know of. I know when we originally started using vitamin D, it was like, just give people a lot of vitamin D. If they got sick, then back the dose down. We didn't have tests. So that's how they did it. And vitamin D dosing there's been a lot of debate about it. Some people think that it's better to get it in kind of like how we used to get it with the sun, where you'd be exposed to the sun in the summertime in large amounts, and then you wouldn't get much over the winter. So basically like giving yourself a big dose of vitamin D once a week. There were some studies that looked at giving 1 million IUs once a year. There's different ways of doing it, but most of the time people are taking it every day, every other day, every few days. It's just kind of up to you how you want to do it. And you can dig into the research and see what makes most sense to you. Always want to combine it with other fat soluble vitamins. D, K, A, and E. Those are the big fat soluble vitamins. They all work together and they help each other. Again, feed it to microbes to make it more absorbable and better. That conversion I was talking about to the 125, if you see that, oftentimes it's like chronic infection or cancer. The body is activating the immune system via the vitamin D macrophage activating factor system, the GC-MAF, pushing that system. In order to do that, it needs that 125 in circulation. So sometimes if you see that conversion, it can be like something like Lyme disease or some other infection. It could be a cancer, that the body's using that conversion to make the immune system more active.
So,
yeah.
Yeah,
exactly. The 125 is high. Also, sometimes if it's not in that case, you can use more vitamin K. Vitamin K2 could help normalize the difference, the spread between 25 and 125. So when we're measuring nutrient deficiencies, right, we have serum levels, which is a snapshot, right, of the extracellular levels. The RBC levels might be more reflective of tissues, but we don't really have a lot of really good data there. And RBC levels are not tissue levels. They're still red blood cells. Nutri-Eval is a way that we kind of look at a lot of additional markers. And SpectraCell looks at white blood cell levels. These are different types of testing. But as we get into these, know that there's not a lot of supportive data. We're still kind of figuring out. And do the white blood cells represent a more accurate pool of a certain nutrient like magnesium than the serum does? Maybe. Could be. People think it does. Vitamin A, great place to get it. It's from red palm oil. And this is retinol versus carotenoids, right? The carotenes, which, the carotenoids are about 1 to 6 conversion rate. So if you take 6 times as much carotenoid to get the same amount of retinoic acid. There's the thing called the all-trans retinoic acid receptor, the ATRA receptor in our bodies. And that's really powerful for squamous cell carcinomas. You can pulse dose vitamin A at high doses to reduce them. Vitamin D is protective against vitamin A toxicity. And just overall, 1 to 3,000 IUs of vitamin A a day is safe and effective in my research, looking at many, many studies. So basically, beta carotene is, it has to be turned into vitamin A. So it's hard to get toxicity from that. The B vites, folic acid, B6, and B12, again, reduced forms, right? Like P5P, it's a bioactive coenzyme form. It's essential in over 100 enzymes involved in protein metabolism, including the manufacture of hemoglobin, amino acids, and fatty acids. Remember, these are all the main things that we have to have in order to transform one thing in the body into another. We can't do it if we don't have these things. Want to lower homocysteine, B12, B6, folic acid, trimethylglycine, inositol and choline, methylation donors. B6 deficiency, mostly from secondary causes. Again, medications, Parkinson's drugs, got to give a little bit of vitamin B6, NSAIDs, oral contraceptives, and symptoms of deficiency, peripheral neuropathy, also with platinum-induced neuropathies, B6, anemia, seizures, and oftentimes we don't test B6 because it's not very accurate. Folic acid testing is not very accurate. B12 testing is not very accurate. We have a test called MMA, methylmalonic acid, which is a good way to measure vitamin B12 in the body. MMA, don't measure B12. Again, like I said, use methyl or hydroxyl forms of cobalamin. And the macrocytic anemia is the swelling of the cells when there's not enough B12. Here's some dosage ranges for you to have for, just kind of like every day. If you want to have people be having enough nutrition when they're exposed to toxins and you're kind of doing work with them. You can see here's our good dose ranges. And ideally, you're measuring some of these levels, like measure their zinc, measure their magnesium. But magnesium, you don't have to worry about it with the blood work. You're just going to find that the only toxicity with magnesium is that they'll get loose stools. You'll just get diarrhea. It's an osmotic, so it pulls fluid into the digestive system. So if your person has too much magnesium, the only thing that's going to happen is they're going to get diarrhea. So don't push the magnesium up too fast because you can get them to diarrhea. Then they don't ever want to do magnesium again. So you got to be careful with that. But it's a great way to promote bowel movements also. It's one of my favorite things for bowel movement issues. And then nutrient overload, right? Can you get too much? Well, you can. In iron, you get the constipation. It can inhibit zinc absorption. You can have toxicity if you get iron overload if you do over 45 milligrams a day for the very long term. And of course, some people, if they're losing blood, you don't want to just give them iron every day. You want to fix the blood loss, right? You want to stop that. People shouldn't need to have to take iron every day. Some people have beta thalassemia. Then you've got to be very careful. People have other conditions you've got to watch out for. But, in general, you don't want to be dosing, iron for a person's whole life. You want to be doing it for certain, periods of time. This is severe toxicity, 60 milligrams per kilogram. Like I mentioned. So copper deficiency comes with high levels of zinc. The levels of zinc that you need to be to get into that like suppressive dose, 150 to 450 a day. Sometimes people need a lot of zinc. And even though in medical school, you're told that you should always give copper with zinc, I find that in most cases today with chronic disease and nutrient depletion and cancer and everything else, the zinc levels need to be dosed higher than what I was taught. And I don't give copper in any cancer cases at all. And it's very hard to get zinc levels up into the high end of normal range. It takes a lot of zinc. Most people take like 90 to 120 milligrams a day of a highly absorbable zinc just to get into the upper part of the range. But make sure you're monitoring it. Vitamin D, again, hypercalcemia, and vitamin B6 neuropathy. When low blood levels often reflect a frank deficiency of a nutrient. High levels can represent shifts in metabolism and transport rather than frank excess. Keep an eye on that. And blood levels can reflect momentary supplementation. So, if you're measuring something and you see it high, it could be that the person just took a big dose of it before they did the blood test. So make sure you keep that in mind. Serum, urine, saliva, RBC. Again, what's accurate and who's checking on the data? What data supports your test? You got to evaluate that. So serum testing is very accurate. Some of the urine test is good. Saliva tests you should always use with other things. Red blood cell levels can be more helpful in some things. White blood cell levels still to be evaluated. The Nutri-Eval test, I think, is, again, try to put a couple of different pieces together so you have a couple layers to your insight. And I was saying the dry blood samples for vitamin D and vitamin A are good. They're easy, they're cheap. You can do them at home, and they're accurate. That's the vitamin D blood spot versus serum. Nice and accurate trend.
Is, what 25 is?
It doesn't. Only the 25. So you have to see you have to see their conversion rate, make sure it's good. Then you can follow the 25 over time. But two basic forms of evidence, primary forms, long history of traditional usage. That's very important to me. And then sufficient data to inform clinical decision making. Many tests claim to be useful as predictive tools, but often the data is scant. Evaluate that out yourself. Don't take others' word for it. A lot of variability. Drugs can affect nutrient levels. Fasting and exercise can affect levels, right? Remember, it's just a snapshot, so you always want to take that into account. Biotin can alter labs. We know that. So if people are taking biotin, or if you don't know, if something's weird, ask them if they're taking biotin. This is a study where they took 10 milligrams of biotin daily for 1 week, and then 40% of the tests were altered. So it's real.
Thanks. Gotcha.
Calcium can harden and disrupt your body. Only 1% of it is in the blood and soft tissues. The rest is in the bones. We are a repository of calcium. I'm not going to have time to go through all this, but here's, you see calcium. The metabolism of calcium is really cool. Take a look at it. Try to get just look at this diagram when you get a chance, because this is how calcium is regulated. It's not about us not having enough calcium. It's about where the calcium is going. Calcitonin, parathyroid hormone, pulls the calcium into the blood, puts it on the bone.
You got that.
Lots of important functions, but when it's displaced, it leads to calcification, which is what we're doing as we age.
You think?
Kidney function, very important. Regulating vitamin D, regulating calcium levels, interacting with the parathyroid hormone, kidney problems with parathyroid. Always keep that in mind. And then phosphorus Another big part of this, right? Hyperphosphatemia.
Eight.
I love carbonates, using, bicarbonate to regulate urine pH and lactic acid. Here's some good stuff for that kind of like coronary artery calcification. Donnie talked about this yesterday, this measure of kind of calcification in blood vessels. When kidneys are really disrupted, careful with animal protein. Too much protein can be hard. Remember creatinine levels, breaking down the muscle into creatinine. That's part of what we see. Supplement with vitamin D, magnesium, bicarb, K2, and then botanicals like celery seed, nettle seed, and hydrangea to help regulate that system. There's another look at that diagram. And correlate nutrient testing with clinical presentation, right? If bone loss is the issue, look at these different tests. You can look at neuropathy, that's the symptom, B vitamin deficiencies, anemia with people having shortness of breath, and always use your clinical diagnosis in combination. That's it. Thanks. It's really been a pleasure, you guys. Thanks for all your attendance this year. It's been really fun to share with you all.